I think there might be a Slash interview up there. There might be a Duff. I've interviewed Duff. I interviewed Matt Sorum.
Welcome to the podcast, Appetite for Distortion, episode number 513. I don't know why I said that so dramatically. Brando here, and today we are joined by the author of TONECHASER, Understanding Edward, my 26-year journey with Edward Van Halen. Welcome to the podcast, Mr. Steve Rosen. How are you, sir?
Brando, I'm doing great, buddy. Thanks so much for having me, and thanks for your patience. For all the people out there, I made this very sweet person wait on me, and I never do that. So have some patience with us all. So thanks, man. Cool to
It's a
be
good,
here.
it's a good segue because I actually have patience in Hebrew tattooed on my arm, Saplanut.
You really?
Yeah, which is actually kind of an oxy moron having, somebody who's Jewish having tattoos or whatever. But obviously, I'm not that religious. And
You know, it's funny, and I don't because we could certainly go off on this tangent as well. But I know that Jews aren't supposed to have tattoos, but I think at a point in time it got past what it kind of used to mean, and I see Jews with tattoos. I think it's a good thing. So good for you,
yeah,
man.
thank you. 'Cause, the tattoo culture certainly has changed a lot in my lifetime. And if you're watching this on Zoom, not only I don't know why there's like show and tell all of a sudden. Speaking of which, you may hear my son in the background playing. So that's part of the show and tell here on Appetite for Distortion. So he may join us. We'll see. Showing off tattoos, but I'm also wearing my Van Halen shirt from the 2012 tour. Unfortunately for me, the one and only time. See, I'm frustrated too. I don't know if you heard again Harrison Rex screaming back there. The one and only time I saw Van Halen was in 2012 because they and that was kind of like on the Guns N' Roses podcast. I had never seen GN'R until 2002, and that was with Buckethead. So I hadn't seen Axl and Slash until 2000, until they got reunited. So that's why I'm excited to talk to you and to kind of, well, you knew Edward Eddie Van Halen for quite some time, but before we get to that moment, we'll learn more about you, how you got to be this person who spent such a long time with Edward Van Halen and all other musicians, and just being a journalist. How did young Steve start out, and what was his path to get where we are today?
Little Stevie Rosen.
Sounds like a
Grew
friend
up
of mine.
exactly. Grew up in St. Louis and moved out here. My family moved out here in to California in '59. So I grew up in Culver City,
Mm.
California. Uh, I was I was listening to music. Had a little transistor radio. It's funny. Brian Wilson just passed away. Culver City was about a half hour from where the Beach Boys were from, Hermosa Beach, and the beach cities were very close. Um, I love the Beach Boys. I love listening to those songs. All that surf music, I can remember hearing uh, like Pipeline and all of those surf instrumentals. And I can remember that there was something about the reverb. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know it was reverb. It was just something about the sound of reverb, on these guitars, that somehow resonated with me. No pun intended. Um, uh, so I love music. I love to read, and from early on, I was writing. I mean, I can remember the point in time when you're in, I don't know, was it second or third grade, where you actually learn to write, and you're learning those little letters, and you got that little paper with there's like a little serrated line in the middle. You got to come up and over.
Sure.
I can remember the process. I loved it. I can remember the point where it's like, oh, if you put the CAT together, that makes it. I remember that clearly somehow. So I loved all those things. I get a little bit older, and I get a guitar and I start playing guitar, and I have bands with friends, and I get a little bit older. I'm in high school. I'm a senior in high school. I wrote a little column for my high school newspaper where I would go out to clubs and review shows, and I loved doing that. It was so freaking cool. I was never a popular kid, so I write a review. I'd go to the Whiskey and see. I remember I saw some amazing shows there. I saw the Allman Brothers and Chicago. I mean, this is like 71, 72. I mean, incredible shows. And then the next day, all these people who would never talk to me go, "Oh, I see you wrote a review for the school paper. That was so cool, Steve." It's like there's something here. There's something here, So we
Sure.
fast forward a little bit more, and I sort of started sending out live reviews to various magazines where I could find addresses. Even though realizing that none of these magazines ran live reviews, but it was my only way of reaching out to them. Obviously, I couldn't do interviews. I didn't know anybody. So I get a little thing printed in sort of a little local publication called the LA Star, which was like a softcore porn kind of a newspaper.
Okay.
The kind you used to buy in, you put like a quarter in the vending machine and open it up and you pull out a copy. I
Yeah,
call it
yeah.
softcore porn because you only bought it because you would turn to the back page and look at the massage ads. You
Okay.
weren't buying it. It wasn't like it was filthy or anything like that. You weren't buying it to glean any inside information about music. But that acted as a springboard. So from there, I wrote a couple things for the LA Free Press, which is a very hip underground newspaper at the time. And then that leads to me meeting sort of a publicist for a company called Gibson and Stromberg, who are one of the first rock and roll publicists. They handle everybody from Jeff Beck to Tull to the Stones, Steely Dan. They open these doors. I reach out to Guitar Player magazine in '73, write for Guitar Player for 7 years. That leads to writing for Guitar World, and then at the same time, Cream and Circus. Did a couple things for Rolling Stone and other magazines of the time, Musician and Zoo World. There was one called Rock. And it just kind of springboards, and here we are 50 years later. And I never had to take another gig. I was always this freelance journalist. Along the way, I wrote some books. My first book was Jeff Beck. And in fact, it was the first biography on Beck that ever came out that was available only in Japan, in Japanese. Subsequently would write books on Springsteen, Prince, wrote a book on Sabbath, Randy Rhoads, and my most recent book, which came out, the first edition came out in 2022, about my friendship with Edward Van Halen, whom I met in 1977 and who I hung out with until 2003. So in a nutshell, that's a little Stevie Rosen story, Brando.
That's a big nutshell. And
Uh,
an impressive resume, and just somebody who lived that life briefly as a freelance writer. That's a wow, that is quite the life. You don't know where your next gig is going to come from, but if you got the goods, you've made a life out of it. So that's it just shows a lot. It just shows that it can be done, and what a career, the people that you can meet, and that in itself, I just want to say that's something I'm sure you sit back and just like wow, like do you have any of these moments of just like wow, like what did I do? It's not like I've had a job at a company for X amount of years. You've been like a pirate. It's
right,
kind of
right. No. And I don't know if you can see any of the stuff behind me. Every wall in my condo here is covered with backstage passes and pictures of me with these people. Whenever I do an interview, I tell the photographer, take all the pictures you want, some demands, but you better take a picture of me and whoever I'm talking to. But I do think about that, Brando. That's a really interesting question because I did sort of take the road less traveled, and it wasn't a conscious thing. Um, but somehow, I loved all these different things, writing and music and magazines, and it came together, and when you're just young, you're dumb and you're stupid, and you don't worry about, paying your rent or if you're going to be able
yeah.
to buy food. For me, I've always been, I've never worried about that. I knew early on I was never going to make a lot of money, but I understood what it meant to save and how you save money, and it's pretty simple. You spend less than you earn. Some people never learn that lesson. I learned it really early on, so
Yeah.
I always had,
Right.
I always had a couple $1,000 in the bank. So my God, if I don't work for the next few months, I'm okay. So But I do look at it and I go, wow, man, you were really lucky, you know. You worked hard, man, but you were lucky. And at the end of the day, none of it would have happened, as you said, without having the goods. So at the end of the day, there was something in me, something about what I was writing, the way that I wrote, that resonated with editors at magazines, that the fans liked what I was writing, and maybe they'd reach out to editors. Oh, I love that Steve Rosen story he did with you and guitar player with Frank Zappa, you know. So at the end of the day, yeah, you know, you can open those doors. You have to kind of be ready for that, and not knowing any better, I believed I was ready. I knew a lot about music. I was a guitar player. I wasn't a great guitar player, but I understood enough about music and theory and harmony. I could talk to anybody about songwriting and you know, choruses and pre-choruses and oh, that change, you know, and so I was able to speak on that level. So yeah, I was lucky. I worked hard, and I was there at a point when all these music magazines were sort of growing up, and they needed writers, they needed freelancers because they couldn't handle all of this stuff in house. So yeah, you're there, and hopefully you know, you make your bones, and the next time there's a story to be done, they give you a call. So it was pretty remarkable, you know, for
And
sure.
what uh, I appreciate about that time is that there was only a finite amount of outlets and a finite, you know, you had to have the goods again. Today, it's a free for all. Everyone's a freelance journalist. That word is kind of unfortunately lost some meaning, but I'd like to think that the real readers will know who the real journalists are, and whatever. That's a whole other conversation. But before I lose it, and to talk about, and before obviously talking about Eddie Van Halen, because you mentioned Jeff Beck, and obviously with my Guns N' Roses theme, we'll tie that into everything within the Eddie Van Halen. That's what I do here. What do you know about when he was at the Paris pay-per-view with Guns N' Roses and he got tinnitus? Because when I do you know, I saw an interesting comment saying that wasn't, he made that up because he got nervous, or did he really have tinnitus? Or I don't know. It was just an offhand comment I saw on social media, which obviously has no weight to it. But do you know anything about the?
Honestly, I don't know a lot about it. I do believe that he absolutely had tinnitus.
Okay.
You know, look, I mean, I was lucky enough. I saw Jeff Beck with the Jeff Beck group, you know, with Rod Stewart in '69, and I remember that concert as being so freaking loud. So actually, what shocks me is that more musicians didn't get tinnitus. I mean, my God, you know, the amps are right behind them. So I wish I could tell you more. Um,
Okay.
I can't, but I know that he suffered from it. Townsend had it. You know, uh,
You'd be surprised. Just the fact that you brought up Jeff Beck, and I think it was recently the anniversary. I do these on these this day thing. Everyone does those, but I do it, of course,
yeah,
Guns N' Roses related on social media, and it was just the Paris one, and everyone talking about how Jeff Beck, you know, he was there for the sound check to play that song Breakdown, and they didn't even play it live at all without Jeff Beck, and that's a song they don't really play live. So it's just something that could have happened, but unfortunately, because of his tinnitus, uh, didn't. But if I can use the GNR as a continue to use it as a pivot,
sure.
uh, Slash said this about Eddie Van Halen, that all the great ideas he had that were uniquely his own, and that all of these left of field kind of things underneath all of that was a really tasty blues guitar player, and he just added all these other ways to branch out of his expression on top of that, and that's why nobody could ever touch him. So something that's, I'm stating the obvious that even the top tier guitarists praise Eddie Van Halen. So when you first, I guess if we can just rewind, when you first met him, what did you first meet him as? Did you know he would become this guitar legend, or was he your friend Eddie? How did you first meet Eddie Van Halen?
Well, that's a great question. You know, I disagree with what Slash said.
Okay, all right, fair.
You know, I mean, I don't disagree that Edward reinvented guitar. I mean, obviously we all know that. To call Edward a blues guitar player, I don't think that's correct. Look, Edward was listening to blues guys, this and that. Did Edward listen to? I mean, really try to listen to those guys, Howlin' Wolf or B.B. King and those kinds. I think Edward might have got his blues secondhand from listening to Eric Clapton. Eric was a blues guitar player. I mean, there's no denying that. So I don't agree with calling Edward a blues guitar player. I mean, I really don't. I think you'd be hard put to listen to those excerpts where you go, oh my God, there's that blues, there's that pentatonic thing that he's doing. That's me.
Hey, you're the guitarist, so I appreciate, and you knew that. So maybe he hears blues where he wants to hear it. Maybe he's hearing something that perhaps wasn't there in his playing. But no, I appreciate the perspective for you.
Right. So I just kind of want to toss that out there and piss off the GN'R fans out there. But
it's all perspective here. It's all good.
Yeah, man. So I think that really what was so interesting about my friendship with Edward is that I did meet him 8 months before the first album ever comes out. So I meet him at the Whiskey A Go Go one night in July of '77. They had signed the Warner's deal, and I believe that they had started working on the record. I don't know, and I don't know my chronology well enough to know if by July '77 the album was done. I don't think so, because I can't believe they would have finished an album that early and waited 8 months to release it. It's possible. I think it was completed a little bit later in '77. So I meet him one night at the Whiskey. Cheap Trick is recording a live record. It's like a radio promotion. Oh, we're going to get Cheap Trick over at the Whiskey, and we're going to record a live record. And I was introduced to him by my friend Michelle Meyer. Michelle booked the Whiskey, and so I was there with my brother to see Cheap Trick. I was a Cheap Trick fan, and she says, "Hey, there's someone you need to meet." So she takes us upstairs to the Whiskey dressing room, and I see this guy standing in the corner. So again, this is July '77. There are no articles on Edward Van Halen. There are no stories on him, right? I'm pretty positive I recognized him, from flyers, because they used to put up flyers up and down Sunset Boulevard. Hey, come see us. We're playing the Whiskey, Gazzarri's, whatever it would have been. But there was no press on him, and this is the other strange thing. I had never seen Van Halen play before meeting him, which is, sorry about that, which is very strange, because I was at the Whiskey and the Starwood where they were playing virtually every week, and how I ever missed seeing them at that point was amazing. So I just knew this person as somebody who had a band called Van Halen. They had scored a huge record deal on Warner Brothers Records, but I didn't know if he played like Angus Young or Leslie West. I didn't know him from anything. People had said to me, "Oh, you got to hear this Edward Van Halen guy play. He's an incredible guitar player," but I didn't know that. So we meet and we just start talking about Jeff Beck. Jeff Beck comes out. Jeff Beck was my favorite guitar player of all time. I think Jeff is the greatest who ever lived. I think Edward's in the top 5. I think Edward was the most influential guitar player that ever lived. Some people will say it's Jimi Hendrix, and it's impossible for me to argue on it. The reason I say that about Edward is that part of his career developed during the digital age, right? With computers and internet. Jimmy was all analog. You found out about Jimi Hendrix by reading a magazine or hearing him on the radio. It was only later that Jimmy was on, all the podcasts and stuff. So Edward had the advantage of, instead of 1,000 people or 100,000 hearing him, 50 million people could hear him. So that's my reasoning behind him being the most influential of us. So we talk about Jeff Beck. Richie Blackmore comes up. I was also a huge Blackmore fan. Clapton comes up. I love Cream, and I thought Blind Faith was good. Honestly, this is a little off topic. I don't think Eric really did much from the point his solo career started onwards. That's me. I was a purist. I loved the Cream stuff, but Edward loved Cream. Um, and that's kind of how the friendship started. By the end of the conversation, he runs out of the room and he comes back and he's got a pen in his hand. He picks up a paper from the littered whiskey floor, and he's writing something down. He hands it to me, and it's his phone number.
Hmm.
Hey, man, I really enjoyed talking to you. I really like talking to you, man. Call me. And people will ask, well, where do you think the friendship started? How long were you hanging out with him before the friendship started? Without romanticizing it, I really think that the friendship began there that night, and certainly over the coming months, I don't think it took long that we became pretty close. He didn't live far from me. I lived in Laurel Canyon in the Hollywood Hills. Edward lived in Coldwater Canyon. Coldwater was the expensive part. Laurel Canyon was the funky bohemian part. So we lived very close to each other. So he would pop by at my place, and I would drive over there, and he would call. I mean, really early on. So I think the friendship developed pretty quickly and pretty kind of seamlessly. But I really do believe the seeds were sort of sown that first night at the whiskey. It was pretty amazing.
Then what happened with this guy that you met? You're just talking about your love of music, and you didn't know him from any other guitar player to when he started to become Eddie Van Halen, and you're just like, where it's almost like a noun. Like I mean, obviously it's a noun, it's a name, but it's more of just like it's I guess you're the author. I'm just trying to think of the right way. It's a phrase. I guess that's I'm looking for the word
Yeah,
phrase.
yeah.
It's a more than a name. It's a phrase, Eddie Van Halen. So when did that start to happen, and did that change your friendship at all? Like, is that's kind of a cautionary tale with a lot of people
Right,
when somebody becomes famous and friends and family and their whole inner circle. So what happened when you started to get famous?
right. That's a great question. So yes, yes. So my whole point of telling you that I met him before the first record comes out. So the postscript on that is uh, February '78. The Van Halen record comes out. I'm on Warner Brothers mailing list, right? I'm on all these mailing lists now. It's just rock and roll journalists. That's part of the swag, right? Magazines never paid any money. But you got free albums, you got free concert tickets. So I would get all of the monthly releases from Warner Brothers Records. And in this particular release of February '78, I remember it was the Van Halen record. There was a Manfred Mann record. There was a record by the Ruddles that was like the takeoff on the Beatles that
Sure.
Eric Idle did, right, from Monty Python. And I'm thinking, oh my God, this is that guy, Edward Van Halen. This is his band. I got to put this on. So I put it on, my little record player, and drop the needle, and it's that gong, 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 that thump, the bass thump from Running with the Devil. And I'm listening, going, wow, this is pretty cool. And I kind of did a needle drop. I didn't listen to it all the way through, but I kind of needle dropped it. And I write about this in TONECHASER. Um, I didn't think it was very good.
Hmm.
I thought, yeah, he's a good guitar player. But in 1978, there were a shitload of good guitar players. I mean, George Lynch was around. Um, Rusty Anderson was playing in a band. Rusty would subsequently go on and has been Paul McCartney's guitar player, who's an incredible guitar player. I mean, there were a bunch
As
of
as we're recording this, by the way, happy birthday, Paul. Sorry, I just needed to say
That's right. Happy birthday, Paul.
that.
Um,
And Dizzy
uh,
Reed as we're recording this.
yeah, man. So there were a lot of good guitar players. And on top of that, and I write about this to try to frame where I was coming from, so people wouldn't go, not very good. Are you out of your mind? This guy's the greatest guitar player since Eric Clapton. So people understand. Again, you have to understand. Um, I had been going to concerts well before I started writing. Uh, uh, since, God, I probably went to my first concert when I was 14 or 15. So I had seen Jeff Beck. I had seen Cream. I'd seen Hendrix. I saw The Who in '66. I'd seen Purple. I'd seen Paul Kossoff with Free. I had seen these amazing guitar players. I was listening to those records. The first Zeppelin record, the first Jeff Beck record, Truth and Beck Ola. I mean, I was listening to those records and I was transformed by them. And so I get the first Van Halen record, and not consciously trying to do it, but it's human nature. We judge things by what we know, what we're familiar with, right? So you're going to hear any new band, as good or bad as they might be, against Guns N' Roses. I mean, it's just impossible not to. Or against Slash, right? So I judged every guitar player I ever heard against Jeff Beck and Eric Clapton, Cream era stuff, and Page and Pete Townsend. I mean, my God, David Gilmour and Robin Trower and Martin Barr. And so I heard this stuff and I thought, yeah, he's good. He's kind of like a Richie Blackmore. He's kind of got that fast thing down, and the band does those fast Purple-like shuffles. And, that was my first impression. Everybody was telling me, you don't know what you're saying. You're wrong. So the next day I go back, I make a big cup of coffee. I'm a huge caffeine guy. And I sat down and listened carefully. And I go, oh, my God, that's what everybody's talking. That's the tone. And that's that technique where he falls seamlessly between playing the rhythm, and then he goes into a solo thing, but there's no rhythm on the record, which I loved. I loved that organic approach, which was all Edward, because they initially wanted him to do overdubs, put a rhythm part. He goes, I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to overdub, which I thought was amazing. So again, to get to your point, Brando. So that record comes out. They go out on the road. So he goes away, where he opens for Ronnie Montrose and Journey. By the end of that tour, they're blowing. Van Halen's blowing those two bands off. He goes and does a show. They do a show on their own, Day at the Green, which is actually the second time I run into him. This is about a year after the first time. This is July '78. AC/DC opens the show, Van Halen, Pat Travers, Aerosmith, and Foreigner. I'm there to interview Foreigner, Mick Jones, for a Guitar Player magazine, but I was also hoping to see Van Halen, which I don't, because I'm sort of dragged into interviewing AC/DC, who I really didn't care for. But that's another story. But in answer to your question, I can tell you those first two albums, the first two tours, he was happiest. So here's this kid from Pasadena, gone from playing 200-seat clubs, they're now headlining, right? And they're now going to Europe and opening for Black Sabbath. I mean, his rise was pretty quick. He was incredible. He was joyful, and he loved every moment of it. I don't think that the fame side of it really ever caught up to him until, I want to say, the early 90s. I sensed the change in him. He was a different person. That person that I knew was disappearing. Certainly previous to that, there's discussions we had. He was unhappy with the band. He wanted more from the band. He was unhappy with the label. There were a lot of drugs happening. He drank a lot. He smoked more than anyone I ever met. And I write about this in the book. Not that I was any prognosticator, but I knew that cigarettes were going to kill him quicker than the booze or the drugs, which they did, right? He got cancer. But so all these things were exacerbated. But for those first 10 or 11 or 12 years I knew him, I don't think it really affected him. He had this self-confident thing. He knew he was a very good guitar player, but he never needed to talk about it. He also never needed to hear you tell him you're the most amazing guitar player I've ever heard. But it was a cautionary tale, and man, that's a heady thing. You have people around you telling you exactly what you want to hear. You have all the money and fame and gear and houses and cars, and man, you got to be pretty grounded not to let it affect you. And I think ultimately it did. I think there were people around him who didn't have his best self-interest, in mind, and uh, yeah, that stuff adds up, and we lose him at 67. I mean, he should have been here for another 20 years.
I know it is tough, and with smoking, you're right. It's hard not to predict that, especially sometimes I look at old pictures of him and it's like he's like black teeth, and it's hard to look at, for obvious reasons. And um, for someone that goes back so far with them, with him, knowing him, meeting him before he even knew the band, knew who he was, and seeing, experiencing Van Halen live, and now fast forward now to this book. In interviews that I read about you, preparing for this, that it was a challenge to do this book. And is it because you know so much and you're truthful that there are certain things that perhaps the family doesn't want to get out? Why was this? Because this is self-published. Because when I read it, I would kind of just like, you felt like my guy. Because long story short, I I worked on a couple years on a book with a former Guns N' Roses manager, Doug Goldstein, and he only wanted to work with one specific agency for connection reasons. And that person, because I wasn't an established author, didn't want to work with me. And I said, okay, let's move on. Worst case scenario, self-published. We can do this. There's things that in today's world, it doesn't matter. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter. Things can go viral, the smallest things, if the content is there. But I didn't want to go that route, and that's on him. But to go the self-published route I I admire that, because there are certain people that could look at that in a certain way. So was it It had to have been disheartening, because that you went to all these places to put this out. Why were the challenges? What were the challenges of putting out this book?
All of those things you mentioned, Brando, ran through my head. Um, it was because I knew him so well. Do I do I actually write about all of that stuff? The last thing on this earth I ever wanted to do was hurt or tarnish his image, embarrass the family. The absolute last thing I wanted to do. I mean, really, if you read the book, and it is an honest book, because at the end of the day, that's the only kind of book I could write. If I'm gonna sit there and kill myself day after day writing this book, it has to be that honest. It has to talk about everything I do know about him, as well as myself. I mean, I'm out there, I'm on those pages, and I talk about doing drugs with Edward and doing stuff, and am I proud of it? Not particularly. Is it the truth? Yes. But it's part of the history. Um, our relationship ends in 2003. Um, 17 years later is when I first really start giving serious thought. So during that 17-year period, I mean, I'll be honest. The relationship didn't end well, and I don't want to give the ending away, because I think it's something more interesting if you read about it. It's
Understood.
you know, but I was fucking mad. I was hurt, and it's like, you don't want to be my friend. You treat me like that. Okay, fuck you. I don't want to hear about you. I don't want to know about you. Um, So I would hear about that reunion tour in 2012, or I'd hear about them putting out a different kind of truth, or I mean, it's impossible not to hear from about them.
Sure.
I'm online and stuff. But I just I didn't think about it. In a strange way. Those 17 years go by, and sometimes I look back at it and I think, did that friendship really happen? I mean, uh, I'm talking a little existentially here. I mean,
Right.
obviously it did. But you think, did it happen in that way? Did I, look at it with rose-colored glasses on? Was he not that person I thought he was? And so you think about all those things. So 2020 rolls around. and some friends had said, hey man, you got to write that book. I need to back up for 1 second. In 1986, so this is Sammy had just joined the band. I think it's right before 5150 comes out, but the 1984 record has come out. So Van Halen's arguably one of the biggest bands in the world, right? He is a god. He is a king. Everybody knows him. I realized that writers are going to start approaching him, and they're going to want to write his life story. And so, being the journalist that I am, I thought, I want to write that book. I think I can write that book. I approach him. It actually takes me months to build up the chutzpah, the courage to do that, because I thought one of two things is going to happen. He's going to say no, which would be heartbreaking and disheartening, or he's going to say yes, which was going to be terrifying because, oh my God, Rosen, now you got to write the fucking thing, what have you done? Mm-hmm. So, but I finally asked him, and I think, well, he's going to take some time. He wants to think about it, He takes a puff of a cigarette and goes, yeah, man, of course you could write it. I can't think of anybody else who could write it, And to me, that was like,
what else?
right, what else do you need in your life? I mean, it's respect. And it was all about respect with him. He was big on respect. Disrespect him, and he would probably never let that go. So, and in turn, he gave that to me. That changed. When I talk about him changing later, that part of him changed, but that's in the book. So, some friends said, hey man, you got to write that book. You didn't write it then. It wasn't meant to be. You got to write it now. And I said, man, I don't know. And all those things you bring up, Brando, I think about. I'm thinking, well, I haven't spoken to him in 17 years. I don't know what he's told Alex or, by 2020, or Valerie or, what they think of me in the Van Halen camp. If I start writing a book, they get wind of it. They're going to come. There's going to be lawyers at the door. You can't write. Mm. I don't, I do start writing it. And what we were talking about cats earlier. Before I lived in this place, I'm in Orange County right now. This is like near Disneyland in California.
Okay.
I was still up in the Hollywood Hills, and I had a cat called Arpeggio, and Arpeggio had this incredibly annoying habit of waking up at 3 a.m. wanting to be fed. I lived in like this little up. It was an upstairs and a downstairs, so I have to get out of bed and walk down the stairs, and I give him a can of food. And, then I try to go back to bed and go to sleep. Well, it kept happening. And I thought, I don't know what I thought. I just went into my little computer room. And I think in the back of my head, there was probably some thought about writing, a book thing, but I didn't really know. So I sit down and I start typing, and I look at it and I go, that's not bad. And what it turned out to be was the first paragraph of the book. With me, who has always been his own worst critic, I come back the next morning with my cup of coffee and I read it and I go, that's good. That's pretty good. So I keep writing. 14 months later, I finished the book. But all those things that you brought up, I thought about constantly. Are people going to look at this and go, oh yeah, you're a friend, you're going to say he's this great guy. Oh, Edward Van Halen, he never could have done or said any of those things that you said, any of the darker stuff, So it was like a no-win, which to my mind said, hey man, you just got to be honest and follow what your heart tells you. But as I'm writing it, man, I honestly, there are parts I thought, God, do I really include this stuff? I mean, it was very personal stuff. But it was those little moments that I felt really revealed who he was. And they tended to come out in these interviews that I later called the Twilight tapes, because he would call me at 4 a.m. and he wanted to talk, And it might have been about music, but usually it was about family or the band or how he was feeling. And it was just those little moments when he'd reveal those things for me that revealed who he was. Look, we can look at him on stage and we can listen to the music, and we all know about that side. But this other side, maybe some of the frailties or the insecurities or his own sense of self-worth, maybe we don't know about that so much. And those are those elements that I thought came out in these conversations. I finished the book in 2021. I'm thinking I am sitting on the biggest rock and roll biography.
A gold mine.
A gold
mine. Yeah.
A gold mine, right? No one else has this.
Right.
Right? Edward has done a lot of interviews. There are other books out there. No one has had a friendship. No one hung out with him. No one jammed with him. I introduced him to Ritchie Blackmore and Les Paul and Billy Gibbons. And I sat in a limo with him. And I smoked a joint with him. And we went through a stop sign at 4 o'clock in the morning because we were both so close. I had those experiences. No, a publisher they're going to flip out. I reached out to some publishers. They didn't even respond. One publisher, Omnibus, who was a very cool English publisher, and I had their books. I had books from Omnibus, and he written back, who said, "Hey man, you were really close. You almost made it. The cut, but we just can't do it. Had a couple other responses. The book is too long. It would have to be cut in half. No one's going to care to read about you. All of that stuff has to go." So I thought, okay, rather than me approach the publisher directly, let me go find an agent. Certainly an agent is going to see the value. I reached out to a person who had a list of really heavy agents. I sent out my form letter to these agents thinking they're going to bust down the doors. One agent responded, said, "Yeah, send me a chapter." I sent him a chapter and never heard back. I reached out to my friend Neil Zlozauer. Neil was Van Halen's official photographer. Neil had put out several photography books on Van Halen. So I figured, man, he probably knows a cool agent or a cool publisher. He could give me a name, And if you know Neil, Neil is loud, confrontational, and abrasive. But if he's not those things, it means he's not your friend. So I've known him for 50 years, and he's never not yelled at me, in love, So I said, "Neil, hey man, look, I wrote the book, and I was wondering, man, do you know a publisher or an agent?" And he goes, "Don't be a fucking idiot. You don't need an agent. Don't get a publisher. They're not going to give you any advance. There's no money to be made. Do it yourself, Don't be an idiot, And he had done his last book, self-published. And I never even thought about it. I didn't even know self-published. What do you do? I mean, so that, okay, make a long story short, I go out there and start looking for printers. I got to get the book printed, you go through printers and, went to some printers over here and they want, unless you order, 12,000 copies, it's going to cost, $29 a book or something. So, I mean, it would have cost you like 80 or 90 grand for a marginal first run. It's like, that's insane, Keep looking around. I find a guy who is a big Van Halen fan. He wants to do it. We're talking. He gives me a great price. This guy flips out. He ends up in some exotic island with the police running after him. He's in a boat and he's arrested for drugs. I mean, the story.
It sounds like a book in itself.
Exactly. I meet somebody who actually worked for this printer, who had a connection with a Chinese printer. I said, "Okay, sure, man, I'm open to anything." Anyway, I talked to these Chinese printers. These people are unbelievable. They do an extraordinary job. Their prices were like 20% of what any American publisher would want to do. The detail, I mean, the book is beautiful. The last thing I wanted to do, and no offense to anybody who's self-published, self-published books tend to look like self-published books. The quality of the paper isn't as good. The font is usually a more generic looking font.
Well, yeah, that's the resources, and that's why it's self-published. But when you're when you're getting jerked around like you were, when you would think I was flabbergasted when I read that. You would think that you were like I said on a gold mine, and
Yeah,
about Eddie Van Halen and somebody who has a unique perspective with him is a story that you want. You always find those kind of like
I know.
the neighbor of somebody and through their eyes, and so I all
I know.
silly, and I'm having to get all these PTSD flashbacks of just all the BS that I was given about about the GNR book. But I do have many years ago a self-published book about a Cape Cod family. When I
Huh.
did my first radio job, I don't know, I haven't mentioned this in a while. My first radio job in Cape Cod, I had to get other jobs to support myself because you don't make money in radio either as a freelance DJ or whatever. So one of them was working in this at the time was a sandwich ice cream shop,
Really?
but 100 years ago it was like a post office and a medicine.
Oh,
Upstairs you had a museum with all these old documents about signing, peers on the decks of all these things. So he's like, and he was dyslexic and knew I had writing at that. He knew I liked writing and at that time some experience, in high school because I was still young. So over the summer, I helped him put together this self-published book, The Hallett Family of Cape Cod. So just but I'm still proud of it though. So there is still something you not something. Should be still you I'm sure are very proud of this book because it's a journey. It's not the journey, not just the journey about your friendship with Eddie Van Halen. It's your journey as an author, as a journalist, to be able to get to this point in your career and to get this story off your chest and to do it your way. It wouldn't probably would not have been the same if somebody else got their hands on it. They would have changed it. They would not have made it the book that it is today. So I don't want to spoil anything more, and I could talk to you for hours about all the pictures on your wall and cats. So we're talking about off the air and all these fun things. But before we wrap up, of course, I got to ask, as it's Appetite for Distortion,
yeah.
the 6 degrees of GNR bacon throughout whether it's through your friendship with EVH or just your music loving. You ever see Guns N' Roses in concert? Cross paths with any of the guys? Do you have any 6 degrees of Guns N' Roses bacon, as I like to call it? Any
Yeah, I actually interviewed Slash. I think the first record had just come out. This is a phone interview, and they were playing. Actually, they were playing at a place not far from where I'm living now. It was I mean, it was a club, but it was a club, and I
Mm.
remember talking to him, and he was exceedingly cool. I mean, he was very cool. I would go on to. I bet I probably interviewed Slash. I don't know, man, probably 6 or 7 or 8 times. Invariably, he is always cool. He's open. Um, he's a monster Jeff Beck guy, so we always have that in common. I know he
Sure,
loves Edward. Um,
sure.
uh, uh, yeah, he's great. I mean, this might get me in trouble with you, and I hope not, or your fans. I was never a huge Guns fan. You
That's
know,
okay.
um,
It's not a prerequisite to be on the show. We all come in
okay,
peace.
well, yeah, I thought, I thought, sorry, Steve, I got to go now. But
Well, it's funny. A few episodes ago, I had another author, Martin Popoff, on who
yeah,
dared call them hair metal, and that got a lot of. See, Harrison. I think Harrison. I don't know if you hear him now. He is really upset that you don't like GNR.
oh no,
On Father's Day, I thought I would have a moment and play "Sweet Child of Mine," and he starts going, "No, no, no, no." He's not ready for rock and roll yet. He's not ready for rock and roll. But that's
yeah.
okay. Are your interviews? Because I don't think he's going to give me much more time here, but I think he's giving me the rap sign. But are your interviews with Slash online? Are these things that we could find out of curiosity? If you're like your old interviews online?
Um, actually, yeah, go to my YouTube page, and I think if you just type in Steve Rosen YouTube or Tone Chaser Steve Rosen YouTube, you'll find it. And I know that I just put up I did an interview with Steve Adler. I'm sorry, a video interview that was really good. So that's up there. I think there might be a Slash interview up there. Um, uh, there might be a Duff. I've interviewed Duff. I interviewed Matt Sorum. I've never interviewed Axl. Interviewed Gilby Clarke. I think some of those are up on my YouTube page.
Okay,
So,
cool. I'll
so
put
go
that in
check it out.
the show notes, as they say.
Yeah, definitely. And before we exit here, Brando, could I just tell people if you're interested in getting the book, you can find it at tonechaserbook.com. One word, tonechaserbook.com, and I will happily sign it for you if you like. So you should go read the book if you're a Van Halen fan. I think you guys would dig it.
Right on, and I'll also put that in the show notes as well. A link
Nice.
to your book. Yeah, Van Halen fan, music fan. I mean, Steve, just this conversation, it just shows, where you're coming from and where it all started. So I always like getting the history of the person writing about the history, and you're another reason why. So it was a pleasure, and I hope we get to do this again.
Yeah, man, anytime.
You got it. So that does it for
Thanks,
this
Brando.
episode. You got it. That does it for this episode of Appetite for Distortion. When will we see the next one? In the words of Axl Rose concerning Chinese democracy, I don't know if soon is the word, but you'll see it.
Thanks to the lame ass security, I'm going home.